know it's gonna work.
Don't fight it. Just let it happen.
Can anyone?
Exactly.
Go
with the flow.
I'm just gonna go pop over here to. Oh, yep. That's where we're at right now. So that's the thing that's happening. Excellent. Live with an unsupported resolution. My phone's ringing, everybody. The magic of. I'll just kill that channel.
Yeah. I never realized it came in stereo.
It does.
That's a good point, yeah.
It's pretty slick.
Well, that's our new intro music.
Yeah. It's copyrighted. Let's see here. Well, we'll call it Friday afternoon deploy. Live stream. All right.
You might get demonetized though.
I have made it. Should I make it private or should I make it unlisted? I'm going to make it private. And then we can just go review it later and say, hey, did that work well or not work well?
Yeah, I like that idea.
Okay, all right. It is private, although I don't have a save button. Man, oh man. Anybody have any intros they want to do? I want to take a stab at it?
Oh man, yeah. I don't, no. Wow.
I'm good.
So we do, so we do like,
I don't do improv.
okay. Well, let me see here. Wasn't prepared to improv. I walked in with some last time. What I did one last time.
Oh yeah, you did two last time.
Yeah. I'm gonna redo this.
Did we use one of them?
We used one. Oh shit! I didn't publish the episode yet.
You should do that.
Send me the audio. Send me the audio. I'm gonna try and do it. I'm gonna try and publish an episode while recording an episode, and it's gonna go.
Oh man,
really.
I like to
recursion.
Live from the Mill District.
No. What was
the second one that I did? Was okay, you guys ready?
Something about scripts of some kind.
That was
TensorFlow.
Yeah.
That's it. Go for it.
Friday afternoon deploy is generated by a crudely written TensorFlow model at the offices of Lofty Labs. It worked for me.
That was really hard not to turn into one of the NPR ladies. Good job.
No, yeah. Totally. TensorFlow.
I thought that was funny.
Okay, well, there it is. You got that one.
Success.
So let me... Oh boy, we should have organized ourselves a little bit better.
Yeah, we have no idea what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let me go.
Just have fun.
Before I forget.
Someone's literally requesting a shameless plug for the Friday Afternoon Deploy podcast right now in the NWA channel.
Really?
Yeah.
Should I send them the live stream?
Oh God. Yeah. I mean, idiots in front of everyone.
Yeah, no doubt.
Alright, we're moving.
Do better with an audience anyway.
We're going from private to unlisted. Let's see here.
Yeah, but they're not going to get the full audio experience.
Yeah, no, they're going to get crap audio.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
There, they still have to tune in for real. Yeah.
Tweak myself a little bit there. Okay.
You got a thinking face.
Man, I can't find. We're streaming to somewhere.
On the internet.
Can't find the link for it.
It is vast.
Like, bro, if I'm streaming, where does it go? You could give me something. Give me something, YouTube.
You guys got a pretty good connection over here?
Yeah, it's symmetrical.
I can only get 20 up and down over the minute. And I'm just mere blocks away. They say they're fighting over a utility rights.
Are you on
AT&T?
Well, we're on Cox Business.
Previously it was on Cox Business. Same problem.
That's the actual where we push the stream.
Cox gave us less than AT&T did.
Don't run me.
Smaller tin cans.
Bang them around some more.
Stream now. You bastard. Oh, look at it. It's down there.
Wow.
Down
Down in the social media corner.
Alright, I'll give you guys a heads up if we actually have people tuning in.
You can't though, because then we're going to talk about the people tuning in while they're watching.
I won't tell you.
This is like quantum mechanics.
I guess you can. It doesn't matter.
As soon as you observe it, you change the show. We just sit here and look at the camera, scared like.
So where'd they? Oh yeah. Oh, Shelby said it. Who's Shelby?
I don't know.
I don't even know who this is. It's great. Okay, here we go.
Be sure to add that.
Yeah.
is the best response to that ever. Like, I haven't heard anything in a while.
Literally
Here's a
watch
live
it, see it
stream.
right now.
Yeah, here you go.
I'll have to look yeah.
So
There we
should
go.
like wave to Shelby.
Well, someone
I
else
don't know.
is, someone else is watching it now. It's not personally identifiable, but there's more than one of us here.
There's already a watcher.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
well,
I
I'm watching.
apologize to the watcher.
To watching.
The audio is so bad because you're not getting the audio that we're recording.
And they can't hear you either.
They should be able to.
Can they hear you say that?
Yeah. So we've got.
Conference mic.
We're actually. It's our
Yeah.
conference.
Oh,
Speakerphone. It's sitting in the middle of the table.
Oh, you should probably say that in the
Some high
beneath the
technology
stream real
here.
quick. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Whoever was listening left.
Yeah. You're like, oh.
Probably from me mugging them.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
we,
true.
We did come in hot.
All right. Well, hey, we're here for episode 5, and episode 4 you haven't heard it yet because I haven't published it yet. So, like, in an attempt to for extreme multitasking, I will be publishing this week's episode. while we're
Deploying
recording.
Friday afternoon deploy.
I am doing a Friday afternoon deploy of the
Live.
show while we record another show. It's like while we're working on the next release, I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'm totally paying attention to the backlog meeting, but I'm publishing last week's sprint. Hey, we got a big crew with us today. We're like, everybody's got a mic. I
5
got
microphones.
5 mics at the same time.
Count 'em.
Yeah, so I got
6 with the conference mic.
That's true for the live streamers that are listening. So on my left, I got Alan Fraley.
Hi.
Hey, Alan. Across the table, got Tyrell and Hayden.
Those never get awkward.
You got it.
They never get not awkward.
I was gonna say, give me some credit. I make
No,
it
that's totally
awkward
awkward.
every time.
Yeah.
And
Tell us a
Hayden-
little bit about yourself.
Hey Hayden.
Hi.
And we have our first guest on the show today, which I'm pretty stoked about. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
Can I use your real name?
Sure.
I feel like I have to ask
Go
people.
for it, yeah, it's cool.
Chris Hobbs is with us.
Yeah.
Chris, man, maybe we'll just like start right there and we'll put you on the spot and tell us a little bit about like where you work, what you do, and
Right
just
now,
in general or also in dev or whatever we're talking about.
yeah. Right now, I'm a senior developer, senior engineer from Malwarebytes, and I have a small consultancy. It's called Asha Technologies, formerly Graft, but my business partner can't do any side work anymore. So if I can shout out, hello Breezy.
What up, Breezy?
That's pretty much it. Yeah, I do a lot of different languages, kind of a polyglot. Do security, networks, a little bit of everything, man.
Tyrell, when you do like pen testing work, is that with Chris? You guys?
Yeah, we do security work together. It is yeah, it's great.
Is it that something that is typically done in pairs?
Swarms, maybe?
Okay, yeah. I wasn't sure. There's like, by teaming up on that gives you some options, right?
It depends on the scope of the test, and Chris can speak to this more because he's got far more experience. But it just depends on how many vectors they want tested and how they want them tested. So
Yeah, I mean, if it's a physical pen test, you might have a couple of people watching and one person doing. You might have some people running comms or something like that. If you're doing just border scans or fuzzing code, that sort of thing, fuzzing binaries, you can work in pairs, it's no problem. Or you can work alone a lot of times, 2 eyes, 4 eyes, 6, if you include devices, right? Can see more problems than just one. So.
Let's
Makes sense.
and let's be inclusive. There could be odd numbers of eyes involved.
This is true. This is
Yeah.
very true.
So I don't know. That always seems fun to me. I've never been outside of like being a kid that grew up on the internet in the late '90s and dreaming I was a hacker. I've never done anything in that world of security stuff. It seems like a lot of fun.
It can be fun. It can be pretty nerve-wracking. A
Yeah.
lot of sleepless nights wondering if you've been hacked or if a counter hack's coming or something.
Do you get like blackballed from the industry if you get found out?
No, I want my clients to find me. I mean, it means they're doing a good job.
I guess that's true. I think about
So,
that. Like
yeah.
that's a good outcome
Yeah.
for your customer.
It's an emotional roller coaster, you know, because if you own the customer, like, they're not doing so good and there's some education that needs to happen there. But if they catch you, it's good because, you know, you feel bad that you've been caught. Maybe you're not doing as good a job as you thought, but you feel good because they're at a secure point that you would hope them to be at.
And if you don't hear from them for a while, that means they're doing a really bad job.
Pretty much.
Because if they're like, whatever happened to that penetration test? Oh shit.
Yeah, for sure, man.
Well, that's fun, man. And thanks for coming on. We're pretty stoked to have someone else to come listen to our bullshit and engage with it.
Yeah,
that's an honor. Thank you.
Yeah,
I like the pen testing thing. Like, so I had a class with NTI on network security, and so I called it my hacker class, and so that's my experience into that. That we had a mock network that we would hack into and then hack each other, and that was encouraged and everything. Yeah.
Little capture the flag.
And get to so we learned a little bit about Kali Linux.
Kali's nice because it's got everything you need just right there.
Yeah.
Like, and the other thing is it's clean, right? It's all set up and you can just boot to it, and whatever machine you're using it on is no longer a pen testing machine when you're done with it. Mm-hmm. So you can use it on a client's machine maybe.
That's pretty slick. I think, did you give a talk at one of the meetup groups about it?
I gave a talk about Ronin at the Ruby meetup group.
Okay,
when you guys were
at the old office.
At the old office, yeah.
Yeah, I remember
about exploiting Nginx with Ronin.
Yeah.
We wrote some custom shellcode, and the live demo didn't work, but I had a recorded demo, of course.
Yeah. Live demos always
due to configuration issues, but we got there.
No, it's a lot of fun, and in the world of pen testing, I think we gotta listen to this voicemail that Tyrell got.
Oh yeah, it's a little social engineering.
Yeah, exactly. This was pretty great. So Tyrell's getting like the shakedown from Amazon Polly on this voicemail.
Did anybody buy a burner and call that number?
No, we haven't tried it yet.
Not yet.
So Paige got the same like voicemail. I called her like twice a couple nights ago. So this is like some relatively new to me. I heard it twice in like 2 days.
My wife Sarah got it the day before.
I think it's a new scam. It cracks me up.
Cyberpunk dystopia.
Yeah. We have one that came in through the business. I was telling Tyrell about this week. Like we have one, except that like it wasn't like using a synthesized voice like that. I had a dude that kept calling me and telling me that like, hey, we're calling about that tax lien that's been filed against Lofty Labs by the state of Washington.
Nice.
Which like normally wouldn't do anything for me, except that we had a big client in Washington State up in Seattle for like a year and a half, and I was like, oh shit, did we get like misclassified? They think we owe like, employment tax or whatever up there. And after I did like some research on it, I told Ben, I was like, Ben, go help me look. And we checked Secretary of State websites and everything. We couldn't find anything about this tax lien, and so it kind of put me at ease. And then I started getting calls on my personal cell phone instead of the business line, and it was like a human being, like in a call center, like sounded like it was an American dude just sitting down the street, and he was like, hey, I'm with such and such company. I was like, oh, I'm glad you called. What's the name of your company? And I'm going to report you to the IRS for tax fraud. And he just like immediately bowed right back up to me on the phone, which I did not expect, and he was like, well, that would scare me if I weren't a real company.
Terrific.
But this is totally a real company, and I'm not scared at all. And I was just like, yeah, exactly. He was like, he prepared the rebuttal, and I was like, oh man, like nothing makes me feel like someone's trustworthy. Like, oh, I'm definitely trustworthy, But like, so he gave me that, and then like it got in my head a little bit after I got off the phone. I was like, what if they are a real company? Like, what if he like, exploiting a bad situation, right? Like trying to sell you a second, like a warranty on your car or something. It's a real service. They might try and scare you into doing it, but do I really have a tax lien? But it turned out to go. That's what they want me to think, right?
To either just be hyper emotional if you're trying to work people over, either be super nasty or super friendly.
Really?
And so someone's clearly trained him.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's
I didn't actually think about it.
Kind of like shock them, if you find yourself caught off guard, just get pissed at somebody, yell at them.
Well, that's my normal motivation.
Or play dumb. Be super friendly, play dumb, and most people are willing to forgive you. So you just have to be able to decide in this circumstance which one's better.
That's my thing when I'm outside. I always keep a pack of cigarettes, because if I light a cigarette and wander around like an idiot, And everyone's like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm out for a smoke.
Yeah.
I'm like, why? Well, you can't be here. And I was like, sorry. And they don't say anything. They're just like, that guy's weird, whatever.
Yeah.
But if you don't, if they don't see you, you're breached.
But if you're standing out behind the building without the cigarette lit, and it's just like, what are you doing here?
Then you're
I'm
just
staring at this door.
Yeah, exactly. Because like, I just felt like wandering for a while.
Yeah.
Don't mind me.
Yeah.
Let's go back in there.
Yeah.
I've always been a firm believer that like the best way to get anywhere and accomplish anything is just to walk in like you know what you're doing.
Absolutely.
And anyone who challenges that, just act like they don't know what they're doing.
Absolutely.
Like, listen, Deborah, I don't have time for this. I need in that server closet.
There's places to be, things to do.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't know. So you got that voicemail, like he's come around. I'm so annoyed with like the Robodoll stuff.
Oh yeah.
And without getting too much into political
I
stuff.
haven't got anything cool like that. All I get are Chinese prompts. So I won't say any names, but we know another developer in the region that speaks Chinese. He was able to translate it for me, and over and over it says, please press 1 to speak to a representative. Please press 1 to speak to a representative. Just constantly.
You get fun ones. I've never gotten that one.
I don't know, but it's all in Chinese with like this crazy calm music playing behind it. And so I'm not real sure what's going on. I wish one of these days I'll catch them and like press 1 and see what happens, right? But I may not understand them because I don't speak Chinese, but still.
That's better than anything I've ever got.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it's actually gotten so rampant that people are making content out of getting these calls now. There's a very popular Twitch streamer now who has started streaming just him calling back these scam numbers, and he'll start a timer, and he'll sometimes be on call with them for like 4 or 5 hours at a time.
Just trying to eat up as much of their time as possible.
Yeah, exactly, just to prevent them from like scamming other people. And he's got a pretty elaborate setup. Like he'll do different voices, and he has all these personalities. It's pretty interesting to watch. But
That's cool.
But
I'm not surprised. I mean, we're making it content, right, on this show.
Yeah, I guess so.
I used to have this one that I loved that it actually followed me from job to job on my work phone. And it was just, it wasn't a scam call, it was just some like telemarketing thing, but it was this recording, and you would answer the phone, and it would just be like the low blow of like a tugboat or something, like doo doo, and then this dude would voice over and he'd be like, "This is your captain speaking, and you've won a cruise," blah blah blah. And we used to make a thing of it in our web office at the newspaper I worked at in Conway. And like someone with his phone would ring, they'd pick it up, and they'd be like, "Oh, it's my captain!" I'm like, "Oh, he's calling, the captain called." And then different newspaper, like 4 years later, when I went to work for the Democratic Gazette, I got a call one day on my line in the online department, and I answered it. It was, "Doot doot, it's your captain speaking." "Oh, he found me, my captain!" That one always cracked me
That
up.
reminds me kind of one that we got a while back where they were like, "Oh, you've won a trip to somewhere," flying out of the new airport in Eureka Springs. We're like, really? Where did they put that at? Like, oh, it's in downtown Eureka Springs.
Yeah,
I'm there right now looking at it.
It's in Basin Park, yeah.
Of course, yeah.
For anyone outside of the region, Eureka Springs has no flat land at all.
No.
It is in the heart of the Ozarks. You could not land a plane there.
Running ultralights off the top of the basement.
Yeah.
It's hard enough. It's hard enough to like drive a car through there.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty funny, and it's also a town with a population of about 2,000. So
So, yeah.
not a lot of air traffic, commercial air traffic coming through there.
Yeah,
That's-
not even if you could.
But they've gotten so much more brazen, and it's just pissing me off. And I know it's just my monkey brain reacting to it, but like they're upping the aggression, and it's just making me want to get aggressive right back.
Call blocking apps are getting popular over there. A buddy of mine just blocked 1,800 of them this month alone.
That's awesome. I know Privacy Star and First Orion's, this company at Little Rock, like some former Axion people, but my understanding was that iOS, because I'm an Apple guy, didn't have the right APIs so that you could actually like use an outside app to block calls.
I thought there was one for iOS, but maybe not.
It may have changed. They may have opened up an API since then.
I know
just
I've-
manually block them.
I've blocked the sending me to jail people in my phone, but that's just the one number. And if they change their number,
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
save
I
that
still
number
get to
that she
jail.
said, and we can go to Walgreens and buy a burner and give her
That's
a
true.
reading.
I think we should.
yeah, for sure.
On episode 6, we'll call the
I like that. Well, it's funny you should mention that. There's a podcast called Reply All, and the guy who does that podcast actually it was an IT scam one where you give control and they clean the virus off of your computer remotely. And he started talking with the guys and walking them through, and basically kind of like the guy you were talking about that gets on Twitch and live stream stuff. He pulled them in for this whole time and got a ton of information out of them. Went to India because it turns out they were in India. Like he started asking for the same guy and then realized he had been talking like one of the heads of this call center. I won't go any further into detail because I don't think there's anything more boring than talking about a podcast in a podcast. But the Reply All podcast on catching a scammer is pretty fascinating.
It's fun to play with those guys. I'm always running Linux, and I had one of the Microsoft support scams call me. And so I just sat there and had the guy lead me through whatever and kept telling him I don't have to.
Yeah, that's what the streamer actually does. Is
awesome.
He has VMs loaded up, and so.
See, I should have had a VM. That's what.
Yeah. He'll have them, install the software.
Yeah.
They'll install the software and actually start controlling his computer.
That's right.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
totally
it's really funny to see them just try and extract things from his VM, and I think he sometimes sets up little traps in there too.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So if they go looking through his documents and stuff, they'll open up a screamer or something.
I'm surprised that they haven't been able to filter that sort of thing out, because a lot of malware these days is really sophisticated, down to the point of being able to target geographical regions and people, and look at things like some of the malware I've used for some of my audits will try and make sure that the My Documents folder or whatever is populated with things, or the particular copies of Office and different browser versions are installed.
And that's to prove that it's on honeypot?
Yeah. So trying to worm your way into the network, you want to make sure that you're not in somebody's IDS instead.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I don't know. So I got almost political about this when we were talking about this week, but it's phone company. I'll single out my own phone company. I'm a Verizon customer. Verizon is selling these numbers to people.
Well, sure. And
I understand huge benefits to IP telephony, right? And the fact that we can build an application and use Twilio's APIs to register a phone number and register a local phone number. So someone that's interacting with an app locally is interacting with a local number. So I totally see the benefits to it, but at the same time, it's at what cost that a machine can go spin up a phone number or a pool of phone numbers and appear that they're originating from anywhere. And the answer is it's not really at cost. It's at substantial revenue to telephone companies.
Absolutely.
But I don't know. It frustrates me and it makes me very angry at telecom companies. So just add that to the column of things to be angry about with telecom companies.
It was kind of fascinating too, what people have been able to do. I've seen some software that will you feed it a block of DIDs from a VoIP reseller, and it'll just pick different DIDs to go out of, and then all they do is spend their 50 cents a minute or whatever on those DIDs, burn them all down, spin up a bunch of new DIDs, and it's just neat to watch that sort of thing happen. It sucks that the things are being sold, but the automation software coming out to do the robocalling is pretty cool in and of itself. Pretty ingenious when you can pick it apart.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely here to stay, right?
Yeah.
But
unfortunately.
Yeah. And oh man, if you want to get some robodials, go do some mortgage pre-qualification. I bought those a few years ago, and I went from one scam call, or not scam, but necessarily, but one marketing call a day to 5.
That's insane.
Yeah, they sold my phone number to anyone with a PayPal account.
One thing that's interesting, and we talked about this earlier this week when this happened, is there was a period of time when we had this utopia where they weren't doing that. They weren't calling cell phones, and so we thought we had solved the problem of the spam callers. But they evolved too, so it's interesting to see kind of as technology progresses, those who seek to exploit it and monetize it will always evolve as well. I mean, we've still always got a mailbox for people to cram full of junk mail.
Yeah,
and credit card
which
information.
is all that's become, right?
Right.
It's our mailing address is 20% off coupons from
Right,
Bed
but if one
Beyond
sucker
and your
bites, it's
Amazon.
worth it, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, right. It's a game of volume, right?
Yeah.
Which is why, right, like scan emails and stuff like that are so notoriously ridiculous, is because it's an incredible like top of the funnel filter that the only people that nibble are so gullible that there's a really good chance of them converting, right?
Yeah.
So
They don't even honor the do not call list anymore, do they?
I don't think.
I don't think
Is
so.
there any repercussions for not honoring that?
I don't know. There's places. There's like on FCC.gov. There's places where you can come submit a claim and it pipes it straight to DevNull for you.
They're understaffed for sure.
Yeah, no joke. I mean, and, like certainly there's going to be a lot coming through, but yeah, you can go.
I feel like I'm making beer noises here. Sorry.
That's okay. Beer noises are a critical part of the show. The rule is if you open a beer during the episode is that you do have to.
Oh, yeah, I see.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Provides atmosphere.
So my podcast multitasking is going really poorly because I've uploaded last week's episode, but I can't remember any of the content to give it the title.
Use a Markov chain and just fill it in with random shit.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
We have a Markov chain.
We do.
But what are you going to train it on?
Oh, it's trained. I just can't tell you what.
Retrain it on the robocalls.
That'd be fun.
That would be fun.
We have a Markov chain based Slack bot in
very
our
cool.
Slack channel, and there's a post about it on our blog post or on our company blog. I wrote a post about like it's built in Python and it's pretty rudimentary, but it's like you feed it a corpus of text and it generates Markov chains for that.
That's cool.
So the kind of context is build a Slack bot that mimics your colleague or so and so or whatever.
That's an excellent example for a Slack bot too.
Yeah, totally, right? I wanted to play with Markov chains. I was interested in
Hello.
that. Yeah, and it was like, oh, what a better way to also bundle that with like it's like to date has been our most trafficked blog post for like 2 years since it got published. Like people were it was in the Python Weekly newsletter and a couple other things.
That's
So
wonderful.
we were proud of that. But yeah, so I don't know. I got a big chunk of code laying around that we could Markov titles for all of our shows.
Pipe it right in there.
Yep.
You don't need to name any of them anymore.
There we go. Well, that solved my
There we go.
problem,
Yeah.
and I've automated myself out of a job.
AI solves another problem.
Consider this my resignation. So another topic that I had on our list. I don't know if you guys have had a chance. I know, Chris, we were talking about it just a second ago, and you didn't know what this topic was going to be, so I know you haven't had a chance to research it. But I don't know
Totally unprepared.
about the other guys, but there's kind of a push going to change the organization of Django's core team and how that core team is allocated. And I always find the business of open source technology pretty interesting, right? Because it's easy to take for granted how stuff gets built and how teams are organized, and it's not maybe as like libertarian as you might think. Governing boards come up. You have to protect intellectual property, even if it's open source. You still have to protect trademarks and things like that. And so there's a lot of organization that goes around it. And then also there's like the organization of like the committees of who allows code to get into this project. And when you've got a big framework like Rails or Django or something like that so many people are using, you can't really just turn it loose on the community and let people contribute features willy-nilly. I mean, you can. I'm sure there are examples of that out there, but like, I don't know.
That's how you have those shoddy NPM packages.
I was gonna say that's how we got Node.js. It was just everyone, do your own thing. But like the group behind Django has been basically they've given up commit minutes for a while, and so they've had core contributors. But those core contributors have kind of shrunk over time.
It's a pretty standard process.
Yeah, and the framework itself now is like almost, I don't know, it was 2004 maybe when it was invented, or at least 05. I went to the 10th birthday party, and that was pretty recently. So, I mean, it's, 12, 13 years old at this
I
point.
want to say 05.
Yeah, and so, the core group has started to dwindle, but it doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of people committing and trying to push stuff into the framework. The problem is the amount of active people who can actually review those pull requests and merge them and then follow the process of writing release notes and everything that goes into building software. It's just like dwindling. And so they're kind of there's some discussion, and someone started a dep. If you're not in Python land, Python has PEPs. Django now has Django enhancement proposals. So there's a dep out there to kind of redesign the organizing structure of Django's core group. So I don't know, Alan, you found that link.
I did. I found it in Python Weekly.
Yeah. So what did you think? Did you read through it?
I did. I skimmed through it a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I think something definitely has to change, right? Because like there's definitely some stagnation in Django, and it's got to evolve, right?
Yep.
And any way that we can make that easier is going to be a good thing.
So James Bennett is the guy who wrote the dep and wrote a blog post about the whole thing. We'll publish that in the show notes. But essentially trying to split the groups into mergers and releasers as opposed to just like a core person that's kind of in charge of both. Right now, Django has a position that the Django Software Foundation actually provides a salary for that's called the Django Fellow. So they have a person that basically got paid at least a little bit of money to be a full-time traffic cop. And so that's something they had done a few years ago, kind of moving in this direction of like, someone's got to really be dedicated to this process. And in the world of slinging code, like, it's a laborious thing. Really making an income for someone is the best way to do that. Even, like asking people to do that out of their best intentions and love with software isn't enough, right? With the amount of work that goes into it. Yeah, that Django group is interesting. I don't know if, like, Django is something that I've been a lot closer to in my career amongst all other frameworks from, like, its origin and where it came from.
Well, that makes sense because you were in the newspaper industry.
Yeah, and so Django came from the newspaper industry.
She used a lot there.
Yeah, it was invented in Lawrence, Kansas at a company, I think the company's called the World Company, but the Lawrence Journal World is a newspaper in Lawrence. And the World Company owns that newspaper. I think some television stations like local NBC and ABC affiliates.
I can't find the dep. I was trying to look it up.
Oh, look up the dep?
Yep.
Hang on. I don't have a way. You're not in our Slack group, so I can't message it to
I
you.
hate Slack.
I got a link right here, but I can't.
When they killed XMPP gateways, they killed them.
Do you have Glowing Bear on your phone still?
Yeah.
I can hit you there.
I'm going to send it your way.
I'm not in Slack.
But yeah, so they, it was, a couple guys at this newspaper, Jacob Kaplan-Moss, Adrian Halabody, Simon, I forget his last name, he was in a group, and a couple other people. I know Frank Wiles worked there. I don't think he was in that original group that built it, but he's definitely part of the core team. And, they needed to build a CMS essentially for this media company that had news stories that would run on their TV websites, but also on their newspaper website and also on their radio websites. And so they for whatever reason, decided to do that in Python, and they built this CMS.
Because it's a great choice.
I think so, right? But at the time, everyone was like, what the fuck are you thinking? You're building a web framework in Python, because it's 2005, right?
Yeah.
Python wasn't nearly as highly adopted as it is today because of the scientific stuff.
Especially not in the realm of web development.
Yeah, certainly not in web. It was like, Python was like an alternative to Perl. Like if you need to glue crappy code, you'd rather crappy
server language, yeah.
Yeah, and so they went and built this thing, and at some point along the way said like, hey, this is more than this is more than CMS. We built so much tooling to help us build more pieces of the CMS that it's a framework all its own. So they went to the publisher of the newspaper and basically asked to open source it, and he was maybe what you would expect from like old newspaper family. I've been like, you mean we paid you a bunch of money to build some stuff and now you want to give it away for free? And they were like, well, no, not exactly. We want to open source it, and here's how it works, and we'll still be able to sell the product that we built. And so they built a product, a CMS written in Django called Ellington, and spun up a company called Meteor for Media, selling this to other newspapers. And Django got open source. Ellington was an implementation of Django, but closed source, private intellectual property. And I worked for the Democrat Gazette in Little Rock, which bought Ellington. And so we had this like first commercial application of Django that we had to support. It was like pre 1.0. And because of that, we got to do some on-site training with the people from that company, which included doing some on-site training with Jacob Kaplan-Moss and some of the original developers of it, which I had at that time. I was very early in my development career. I didn't realize how
Important.
yeah, and what a cool thing that was to be like basically sitting down with like DHH and him being like, here's how you Rails. Although that would be a way less fun meeting, I think, than the one I went to, because Jacob was very approachable and humble and not a jerk. But like, so you know, he told kind of that story of how they open sourced it, and then at the 10th birthday, we went to the Lawrence Journal. It was in Lawrence, and we went to the newspaper and actually walked through their code dungeon, because everyone that does dev in the newspaper industry works in some sort of windowless dungeon.
Absolutely.
And they had theirs. It was about the width of this conference room.
Amazing.
Not very wide. But like, you know, that kind of all goes into this because part of the problem that they're trying to address and reorganize in Django is that the Lawrence Journal World still owned the IP, even though it's open source. They're granting a license to it, but they still own it. And so they had to like do a bunch of gymnastics to form the Django Software Foundation to be stewards of the intellectual property. And so that's all kind of fascinating, but those are all steps up to now, kind of like, what do we do with this framework? Which, sorry, I've been rambling for a while on this, but like, I'm glad because, I don't know if you guys have noticed, there haven't been a lot of great new features in Django for a while.
No. So one thing I wanted to ask, I've you know, just briefly read over it, I didn't go in depth into the DP, but with proposing having mergers and releasers, is that a role that you can change, or will you only ever be a like releaser versus a merger? Like, can you kind of switch hats? Has anyone read?
They're going to have to discuss that probably.
I think what he's getting at, so in his, not in the proposal itself, but in his write-up on his blog, James says, I just had it in front of me, I lost it. Essentially that like no one has the power to both write and merge that code, right? And so I think the answer is they're definitely separate hats, and you certainly can't wear them at the same time. And there's probably going to be some restriction between like I write my own code and then I take off my code writer hat, and then 6 months later I put on my what gets merged in hat, and then give myself like favor, right?
Yeah.
So I imagine that would be a debate of people like basically becoming merge masters and releasers for Django, and then going and finding all their like old pull requests and being like, finally, some random shit.
There's some good code.
Yeah. So probably up for debate. I think that the framework he's discussing kind of suggests that they're very different roles and kept separate. But yeah, that's the kind of thing that they'll have to work out. And the proposal goes pretty deep, and there's a lot of commentary on it. I haven't had a chance to read all the way through it, but more than anything, I'm just excited that like recognizing. I think one of the reasons why Django doesn't have a whole lot of new interesting features is not really because people aren't using it. It's still being used pretty heavily, and not because people don't have an interest in building those features, but literally the traffic cop of like what goes in the next release and getting all that merged into the framework the right way has been too much. And so there's just a bunch of feature requests laying out there that no one can.
It might be kind of naive on my part, but isn't it pretty well feature complete? I mean, you can do.
So that's one of the problems, right? It's a mature framework, and so one of the things he addresses in his post here is that why do we have fewer contributors? Well, all the like low-hanging fruit easy bugs have been squashed for 10 years, and so these things that used to be like easy entry points into committing on the framework are gone, and so what's left are really hard things or really abstract things. But also, you know, yes, it's really feature complete from a kind of standard web framework standpoint, but like I feel like Rails has progressed in ways that it hasn't. At least Rails has WebSockets built into it. Like they still can't get Django channels merged.
Well, that was one thing I was actually going to mention and I'd love to we've got, you know, some guys on both sides of the fence at this point in the room, so it's really great.
There's more Rails guys than Python people in the room right now.
So I was really surprised, coming from Rails, I was really surprised to find out that there wasn't just, you know, JSON response, basically an API built into Django, and that you need to use Django REST framework.
Yeah.
And so I would love to see that get pulled into core rather than having to use that. And then Tom Christie can go and play with API Star all he wants. because Django REST framework is now core into Django, and
I wonder
you get an API out of the box.
I wonder if on some level that's why Tom Christie is kind of like distancing himself from DRFs. Like,
Yeah.
please absorb it.
Yeah.
It's sitting there.
He's like, yeah, I made a thing. You can take it at any time. No, really, please
And that's
take this over.
so that's not unheard of. Andrew Godwin created South, which was the database, like the de facto
Yeah.
standard
Yeah.
for Django database migrations, but it wasn't in core until it finally was in like 1.6 or 7, whenever they finally merged it in to core migrations. And then he wrote Django Channels, this WebSockets implementation and asynchronous gateway server, like alternative to WSGI called ASGI. Daphne was the server that he built. And like that was supposed to land in Django 1.9 or something like that. And we got 110, we got 111, we got 2, and now we've got 2.1 I think on the horizon, and still they haven't found the path to
How
make
much
that
larger
work.
will those things make the surface area of Django?
I don't know. One of the things that it does is it certainly
If that's even a concern.
it changes the paradigm.
Right.
But
It's an opinion at that point.
Right.
Official.
the paradigm does need to evolve a little bit, though. I mean, it's feature complete and everything, but web development has changed a lot since 2005.
Right.
Do it in Node.
No, never.
But I mean, like, yeah. Again, that's where I go to like feature complete. Yeah, if you want to blast like HTTP in and out of it, it's totally feature complete. But like, what's the thing in Rails has some sort of WebSocket support built in?
Yeah, action cable.
Action cable,
Yeah.
right? And I don't know what that looks like for how you actually run that in production. If you have to stand up a separate server that's handling those connections.
Nope.
Interesting. I don't know how they've done it, right? I don't know the architecture behind it, but Django just doesn't have that. And so everything about like I need to do some real-time notifications in my Django app is like, am I going to go with channels, which is supposed to be the right way, but no one will agree that the API is standardized yet? Or do I go with like Tornado or some of these other real-time web servers for Python and bolt something onto the side of it? Which both of them work, but like the whole, like the thing that I've always loved and most people loved about Django, the tagline was always it was the web framework for perfectionists with deadlines. You weren't supposed to have to think about all the tools you were going to assemble. You were just supposed to be able to flip it on and you get an ORM and you get everything else that you need to build a web framework, which was true until building a web application required WebSockets as well to like compete with everything else on the marketplace. And suddenly now it's the web framework for perfectionists with deadlines, but no need for any real-time communication, which is kind of
Or an API.
Or an API.
The API is a big one, right?
Yeah.
These days,
I was surprised to find out that the migrations came later with Django. Like, I was, oh wow! I remember inheriting a giant monolith that had no migrations and going about the work of getting that thing migrated so that there could be testing on it. And it was a good chunk of time. It was well worth it. But
migrations will spoil you.
Yeah, they sure will.
Totally.
I hate SQL with a passion.
We just
I
had
avoid it every chance I can.
So at the DemGaz, old school Django, before South, we just, as I recall, had like a big SQL file that was checked into source control and was like, make sure you copy and paste each of these queries when you deploy. And like people would annotate them, like wrote this query on this day, and try and keep them in order. But obviously that went really poorly. And like production deploys, it was like, okay, it's time to deploy the app. Go look at the SQL file and see how many queries we have to run on the prod database.
That's gross.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
That's how we did it back in the day.
I was really happy with the fact that Django does have a default admin backend, though. That was really nice to get. It's just like, hey, that's really easy and fun to have that now.
Yeah, immediately interact with my database in a fun way, right?
Rails has like scaffolding.
Yeah,
Is
the
that the right
scaffolding
thing?
is almost completely useless
Yeah.
unless you're
Oh,
just
okay.
building a Twitter.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Or a blog in 5 minutes.
Yeah, blog in 5 minutes. Most of that stuff is spinners and flame paint.
It's a. I get it. It's a feature they worked into the framework to make a sweet tutorial for how to use the framework.
I don't know if that's what they intended for it, but everybody I know, when you generate new models, generate new things, you either don't generate them,
Right.
or you generate just enough to go in so you don't have to write any boilerplate.
Got it.
But yeah, scaffolding is horrible, especially if you're gonna. I don't do any front end web work at all, but the times that I have built things that require front end, no.
It just gives you so much stuff that you don't need.
You know, on a base generate call, you're probably creating, you know, if you don't give it any arguments, like 15 files maybe.
Sounds like Ember.
Oh, it's Ember.
Yes.
Because you've got like
well, of course it's Ember.
Yes.
Yeah,
I get it. Yeah.
In JavaScript, of course it's Ember.
Yeah, you got like your model, your controller, your view. You've got various assets that sometimes come in with it, and you've got your database migrations. I don't know what else, but yeah,
Some handle farms.
but yeah, perhaps.
Yeah. There's no specific admin gem or like part of Rails. There are.
Man.
Well, it's not actually a part of Rails.
No, I'm being contrarian.
Oh,
I got PTSD from that admin in their
I mean, there are some libraries that try to do that, but they're not very well maintained, and I think a couple of them even have like big security vulnerabilities that haven't been patched or fixed or anything. So
So Django's admin's always been core to it. I mean that's why think about it this way, right? It's a web framework that was open sourced as the underlying stuff that was being used to build CMSs. That was entirely what they used it for, was the product that the development team originally built was a CMS. And so it was all about and a CMS for non-technical people to use. This was for news editors. This was for people with journalism degrees, not people, not people with comp sci backgrounds or even, and this was in 2005, so not people with huge web backgrounds. It just wasn't a thing. And so, so much of the tooling in the Django framework was around how do I quickly make an interface for data.
So with your admin interface, I've had a total of 2 experiences with Django on contract terms. So really, I had 2 Python contracts out of many Python contracts, but these 2 touched Django at one point. Is there access control built in with your?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so there's access control. You've got a built-in authentication system and user management that you can extend, and then you've got user groups, and then you've got group level permissions. So and you've got user level permissions, and you get by default any model that you create in the framework. It creates a permission object for create, change, and delete.
Great.
And so, obviously you have super users that bypass the perm checks, but then you can, at a user level or at a group level that you assign users to, say, well, they can create blog posts, but they can't delete them, and they can edit blog. So you get that by default, and then all of that is just some boilerplate that gets spun up when you create initial migrations. You can create custom permissions on all of your own models and tie into that same system. The one thing it doesn't give you is object level permissions.
Okay.
So all of this is at the table level, but this user can only edit one of these rows in the table. That's something you either have to implement on your own or use Django Guardian. Have you ever used that? It's like an object level permission.
I'm not aware of any pre-baked object level permissions in Rails or any gems that do that at the moment. I know you use things like CanCan for access control, but I can't think.
Pundit is another one.
Yeah, Django Guardian exists, but every time I've used it, it's terrible. And this is probably why there aren't good examples in Rails either, because it's kind of it's a hard problem to, you can't generalize that.
Right.
Yeah, it's every object level permissions are going to be very esoteric to your application. Why can this user only edit that record because of some organizational relationship or whatever, right? So generalizing that problem is really hard. You end up basically just having a whole bunch of methods in your code that take a user and an object, and then you write custom code of can they touch this object?
Do they own it? Are they in a group that owns it? So,
are they standing very near to a person who owns it?
I would like to point out that while we're live streaming this, we've got some comments through our Slack. And they're all just asking us about our beer. No one has said anything about the topics or
that's right.
Or just hey, what do you guys think about this? Just hey, what are you drinking? Hey, do you have this one? Hey, do you have this one?
It's a New Belgian variety pack. Here comes Chris.
I'm gonna knock every mic.
Yeah,
you
don't run the microphone gauntlet to find it.
Anybody need a refill?
We have very few live stream listeners.
It was a snow day. Anybody?
Very few is more than 0, so there's that.
Well, I'm one of them.
Okay.
But so it's a good time to point out though, is this is a test. In fact, I was just recording the live stream. I was just streaming it so that I could go view it later and see if the camera looked okay. It wasn't for consumption. But then someone in the NWA Dev Slack, thank you, sir, asked like, "Hey, you guys haven't given a shameless plug for yourselves today," because that's what I do over there. And I was like, "Oh yeah, how about we're live streaming?"
How shameless is this?
Yeah. We were just setting up the camera to record our shamelessness. But for future ones, I don't know, we'll probably do it on YouTube, but we also have a Facebook page. So it's the one good reason I can give you to go follow the Facebook page for the show is if we decide to live stream this again in the future, that's how you'll know that it's happening and all that stuff. That's at Friday Deploy on all of our social medias. So Django's reorganizing. I really hope something good comes of it. It's like there hasn't been something that's come through Adept yet that I've really wanted to follow or been that engaged in like shaping the discussion. But I think that's one that is important for the future of the framework. So I hope it goes well.
Because especially as widely used as it is,
yeah,
we need continued support for years to come.
And like this is the kind of thing where a bad decision can get made and it kills this framework like 5 to 10 years for sure. Or at least like causes it to. I guess a lot of things it can either stagnate, which is what's happening. They do nothing, or it can go really, really well and like a lot of good contributors and a good system pushes it forward.
Do you think some of this shakeup is a side effect of the Guido situation?
Maybe. I don't know. There's a whole lot
Maybe
of like
people are conscious of their organization now.
Yeah, and like the Python upper rank is churning really hard right now. Jacob gave up his seat as BDFL of Django a while back when he went to be like I think it was CISO for Heroku is where he went there. And Adrian kind of bowed out before that. I forgot where he went to. So like the original core founders of Django kind of stepped away from it a few years back. But yeah, and Python's kind of getting shaken up right now. A lot of people that have built these things are like, I've loved it. The ride was fun, but I didn't want to do this for 20 years, it turns out.
Yeah, open source contributions and free software contributions can really burn a guy out.
Totally. And here I am being like, I don't want to do it either, but please keep making the thing.
It's widely successful at the moment. Hopefully it doesn't disintegrate, but I don't think it will. There's enough people using it, and there's enough projects that are based on it that it'll keep cruising.
So this is a call to people who are dependent on it, right? If you're an organization, right. And this is respect all your frameworks, right? But we use Django, we use a few others. There's other companies in here that use Django, but whatever you use, like that shit's important, right? Your business is dependent on it.
Contribute.
Yeah, contribute in whatever way, whether that's like moral support or code or like if you really want to get like some commits into an open source project, you don't know where to start. Everybody needs documentation.
Yeah,
absolutely. People will thank you and people will love you for documentation.
My first commits came that way. I fixed some typos in the FreeBSD handbook.
Yeah. I had one commit in Django Core that got like obliterated by a merge a while back and kicked that aside, but I think it was like a doc string.
Excellent.
Not just documentation, but like within a function. Yeah.
What's funny is one of my first commits was to an open source NetSuite library, and based on all the rage and pain I had today working on some NetSuite, some Salesforce libraries, I'm pretty sure my next commit is going to be towards fixing some of their libraries, because I'm talking about documentation and broken code and everything. Like, nothing works as expected, and they're just like, hey, you need to bring all of your domain knowledge to this, because we're not going to tell you anything. And oh, by the way, it doesn't really work like you think it does anyway, but here's some links to some docs that you might want to reference.
And as I said before we started recording the episode, like if Salesforce were to give good documentation, it would kill the careers of all of these Salesforce consultants.
Well, there's literally a role called a Salesforce sales engineer, and their job is to build applications within Salesforce for people buying Salesforce, so that you buy Salesforce.
Yep.
And so those guys are just like
esoteric knowledge that's what you're paying for.
Right, exactly. And so those guys are like, hey, I already know all this, so I'll just build it for you, and we'll just charge you for it. Don't worry about those libraries. We publish here once in a while. And so there's certifications around it, and there's all kind of stuff. It's this big nasty process that if you want some of that Salesforce money, you gotta come to the Quran, so to speak. So it's no fun.
So you're going to contribute some to those libraries, and I assume with very, very snarky commit messages.
As snarky as I can muster.
I think
last night.
Exactly.
I think today might have been the most animated I've seen Tyrell
I was pretty
as a
fired
software
up.
engineer.
What was funny was it was giving me flashbacks. Because I've gone through this process once before. I actually helped build and get a Salesforce app deployed and went through like their security checks and everything. And it had been 4.5, 5 years since I'd done that. And now that I'm back in it with a new client and had stepped away and come back, I'm just like, you mean it's been 4 years and you guys haven't fixed this? How is it still this problem? And it's just what happens. I've said it at least 5 times today probably, but when you cobble together a bunch of like broken but successful SaaS products, and then you just like, hey, can we just kind of like OAuth this in the background so nobody knows that they're not connected apps? Then that's cool. Yeah, we'll just do that. Like I pointed out, your username has to be email-like. It does not have to be a valid email because they ask you for your email as well. But your username has to be email-shaped, and then you give your email as well. But they know that your username may not actually be an email because my username is not an email. And it's just like, this is terrible. And I know what you're doing here, and you should be ashamed of yourselves, but you make far too much money for that. So just enjoy the money and pay off the shame, I guess.
I asked Tyrell, what do you expect from a SaaS product that was built for chip and sales from the website's level?
I haven't heard that in forever. I love it.
This is a SaaS product built for someone that arranges their desktop icons by penis. So.
Can't arrange by penis.
I'll have to post a link to that in case anyone stops.
Yeah, documentation is huge, and I would urge you to write documentation for that elsewhere too. Mm-hmm. And speaking of the keeping open source projects alive and making commits, if you're producing libraries, please document it. I know that's an old meme, as it were, but it's true. I hate coming across libraries where I have to read the code to figure out what's going on.
Is there like is there a dev methodology that's like documentation driven development?
README driven development?
Is that it?
Yeah, I think did the guy that wrote Tom Doc do that as well? I don't know. Anyway, README driven development. I did that for a while. Didn't really like it too much because requirements change and then it gets messy. But
that's why I don't like TDD.
Test enough to deliver at that point, but test all the things that might break. But no, I try to just keep I use Emacs. You guys can punch me later if you like. I keep
this guy.
Yeah, so I keep an org mode file open as I write my code, and when I build interfaces, I just sort of haphazardly document them there. And then whatever documentation interface a client or an employer or an open source project is using, then I copy it to that place. That way I don't lose my train of thought while I'm going. And if I forget to document something, I go back and look at my tests and my method definitions or my function declarations, whatever it happens to be, and figure it out from there. But yeah, always document.
I always write documentation last, if at all. That's what happens, right?
It's fine writing it last as long as it gets written, right?
Yeah, it's the if at all part that's the problem. Like kicking it to the last, I'm a big fan of like documentation generation. It's very helpful. It's like in Python you have Sphinx and write the docs down.
Swagger, read the docs and
So read the docs is like the web platform, and then write the docs is the product that they have that helps you generate them. Swagger's got that. You could do some Swagger stuff.
A little bit of Swagger, yeah.
I prefer to write
You got a little Swagger. Well, just have a little Swagger when you want to.
Yeah.
Is that for a DRF?
Yeah, and
Django REST framework.
It is, and even the browsable API, you can write, like, it'll convert doc streams to documentation.
Yeah, doc strings are a great feature.
Yeah,
doc strings.
That's the extent of my documentation writing.
Writing doc streams.
At least you're writing something, right?
That's why I like documentation automation, because that's all you have to do. You write some doc strings and like, some annotations. Mm-hmm. And Swagger lets you I don't know that I've ever set it up right with DRF, but you can set it up to obviously be able to run and test requests from within the UI.
Yeah,
absolutely. Hit your own API. Yeah. I forget, that's another thing that just gets me a little bit about DRF. It's that's not a switch that you flip on. Mm-hmm. And all of the information is there for that UI to do it. So
To be fair, man, I'm still a big fan of Postman. Like,
Oh, Postman's the shit.
Yeah, it's
that's,
awesome.
that's pretty much my interface. Postman and then DRF and whatever.
Postman is like curl for web APIs.
Yeah, Postman's great. I also like HTTP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pie is good in the
Yeah.
console.
Yeah, typically that's what I'm using all day.
So is it like a command line equivalent?
Yeah, it's like a curl with a decent interface.
Oh, sounds good.
It's very terse, and the output from it's very pretty, and the code behind HTTP. Is it HTTP?
I think it's HTTP.
It's
Yeah,
possible.
yeah,
HTTP.
the code is beautiful. It's well written. So if it's not, if there's something in the documentation that you don't understand, or if it's doing something weird, jumping into the code, it's easy to figure out.
What's that written in?
Python.
Is it?
Is it the?
Sorry, I'll just sit back over here and drink
It's okay. I've had some dumb questions. There are no stupid questions.
No,
Yeah, in Alan's defense, it's pie like apple pie.
Yeah.
not
Yeah,
like-
yeah,
not
yeah.
like
Yeah,
PLI.
it's
I was looking to
PIE.
see.
It's
when you-
wonderful.
I was looking
Yeah.
to see if it was like by the same creator as the Python request library.
Well, I
Just
guess
'cause
because
when
you
you
can
described
automate
the
it.
code being beautiful,
Yeah, I love it.
that's how everyone talks about the request library.
yeah.
Have you ever heard someone like wax poetic on that?
No, I haven't
You want to
even
see some
seen.
beautiful code?
Just go into that.
Yeah, just drop into the request library. Python it is. Wow.
This just turned into love line.
Alan's Dr. Drew.
I wish requests would make it into Python core. That would be nice.
Totally. There's no reason for that to be an outside dependency at this point. I don't think. I don't know. Maybe there's something like in the governance of Python.
Well,
Maybe
there's
perhaps
already. I guess they would say there's already. What is it that's already?
Erlib.
Yeah, Erlib's already in
Sucks.
core, and yeah, it's
Yeah,
terrible.
it's
But
awful.
I guess they go, well, we've got a thing, so we don't need a new thing.
For all I know, requests is built right on top of that. But that's fine. They can merge requests in and merge the code and just have that be the low level API that exists on top of.
Has anybody made the request yet for version?
Surely someone.
Yeah,
But
just
But
assume.
do we all just go
Didn't
like,
you
well,
get-
didn't you do it? Didn't you do it?
Didn't you get that the theme of this episode was like open source, we need it, but no one wants to do it.
That's not just this episode. That's
this
that's
whole
life.
community, yeah.
That's ongoing.
Man, did you, Alan, was there another topic?
Yeah. So there was.
Oh, no, I've got it.
Yeah.
This guy. Yeah,
There-
I'll let you intro that one.
Yeah, what is it? Airbnb. So they want to start designing houses.
Designing and selling houses.
Yeah, for you to Airbnb out of.
So you buy the house.
You
the
buy a-
Airbnb,
you buy a pre-built-
Airbnb.
They're like
Yeah,
prefab
yeah.
houses.
So Uber for hotels?
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
but also.
But they provide you the car.
Yeah, it's like Uber for hotels, but you can't get car financing, right? So we'll send you a car.
Yeah.
And
So
this
how
is-
many
here's
people
a-
have to
here's a
stay in your
Ford
Airbnb
Focus.
before you have to pay it off?
I don't know because it's a Fast Company article, so it doesn't actually give any real details.
This is true. Yeah.
But there's some numbers in here, but it doesn't really explain like the price point and things like that. Also, it doesn't really explain exactly the ownership model.
No.
Like you're leasing it, and like the idea is like Airbnb is trying to expand their business. If you don't have rooms to rent out, you got a yard that you can throw a shipping container in. Sweet.
And that's what they're calling it, backyard. Like that's
Airbnb backyard.
Yeah.
How
So
many
they
sheds
so they
do
want you to
squeeze
build like mother-in-law suites in your backyard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
in? Tiny houses.
And rent them out.
So they said backyard is poised to be much larger than ADUs, which is accessory dwelling units, like the technical term for like a mother-in-law suite or something like that.
Yeah. I knew there had to be a non-offensive word for that, but I didn't know it.
That's what everyone calls it.
Yeah, just like I only like wife beaters are called athletic shirts.
A shirts.
A shirts.
Yeah,
Those are
A-shirts.
that's the real thing you should say instead of the terrible thing I grew up calling them. But hey,
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, ADUs is certainly what like the zoning board would call it. And there's like weird. I looked into this because who hasn't looked into buying a pre-built shed and living in it?
Oh yeah.
Is that just an Ozarks thing?
I look into putting one in the middle of nowhere.
We were talking about
Yeah.
you were talking about some shipping containers
Yeah.
there. So had you considered just buying one from Airbnb though and renting
No,
it?
never considered that. That requires enjoying other people's company,
No.
or at least their proximity,
Presence.
right?
At the very least, it requires like not hating cleaning up after them when they
Yeah, I didn't sign up to be a slumlord, right? So
Well,
Or
these
a
are really
hotel manager.
nice, and they're and like most Airbnbs, you can it doesn't have to be slummy.
Sure.
It can be medium.
Maybe that's a market they're ignoring.
Maybe so.
Mm.
It can be like medium nice, and then you can charge like $100 a night, but
There
you
you
can charge like a $400 cleaning fee. Because that's what's happening to me. I've been traveling exclusively by Airbnb for like 4 years, and it used to be awesome, and now it's like that's how
So they get their money back.
that's how landlords are getting their money out of it. Is like, yeah, totally, it's $30 a night, and you're staying for one night. Oh, drag! It's a $400 cleaning fee. But we'll waive it if you stay longer. Yeah, so that's getting pretty gnarly. I don't know. I find that interesting. It's
I guess if you had enough land, you could put several Airbnb buildings out there like that. Isn't there is it over in Pea Ridge where there's a trailer hotel where they've got all these?
I don't know if I was excited or scared or what.
And they're
I
all
just think,
themed,
what?
right? There's like a rockabilly one, and then there's like a pink castle one, and they're all trailers in a big circle, like a wagon circle. Like they're trying to protect everybody.
I'm pretty sure this is what happens in the movie, like The Strangers.
No.
The second one.
These are cute trailers, right?
Yeah.
Like you see on
strangers show up and kill you when
HGTV.
you sleep.
No. It's more like I hang carrots in a garage for a living, and my budget is $7.2 million, right? And so but no, it's like a hotel thing. So
this is why we're nowhere developers. Because we have trailer hotels nearby.
That's true.
Yeah, it's I know Mountainburg in like that area used to have a bunch, and growing up around there and watching the highway, the bypass that's had many names now, so I can never remember the current one.
49.
49 now, that's the one. It used to be 540 and something else I think before that. And so then watching the sad decay of these trailer hotels.
Absolutely.
That's they're still there, kind of.
Just
the
no longer
carcasses of them.
in their prime.
Yeah.
I was stoked. I went back to Hot Springs recently, which is where I grew up, and someone had bought one of the old roadside motels on like the old school part of town, which had been in pretty bad shape for a long time, and we stayed in one, and it was pretty rad. They were tiny little rooms, but like they had been redone, and they were listed exclusively on Airbnb.
Tell them to bring back the German restaurant.
Which one?
There was a German restaurant downtown Fraser.
I know what you're talking about.
I don't remember
It was
the name
like there
of
was
it.
Brick
It's
House.
not Brown House? Not Brown
Brauhaus.
Brown House, yeah.
How do you pronounce it? BRAU. Not the Brauhaus that you might be thinking of.
That's great.
Yeah. I forgot that had closed.
You're going to run people out of Arkansas doing this. They're not going to want to come develop in Arkansas. But that's a great thing, right? Work remote from Arkansas and get those outside salaries and live like a king in a trailer, right?
Fetch your Washington D.C. salary from your trailer hotel.
What's funny is I think we can safely say it now because we weren't sure about having the conversation, but at least for 3 of us in the room, we've had conversations about like, tell me about the trailer you lived in.
Arkansas trailer stories.
Yeah.
We had the other day. Tyrell and Alan and I all found our trailers on Google Maps to share with each other.
Oh, that's wonderful.
This is the trailer in the woods I got.
Mine was a Texas trailer in my defense, I guess.
Yeah, next to the lake or something.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Cedar Lake. Yeah.
Lake adjacent would be maybe more accurate.
You can smell the lake, but you couldn't see it.
And then the people with money would like shoo you off before you got to the water. No, that's our lake. Go away.
Oh man. Well, now that I know that, I can move to my childhood trailer in the woods and open up a bunch of Airbnb hotel. And potentially, I'm not totally sure, but I think Airbnb is at least financing these.
You could also move to Tulsa, right?
Is that all?
Remember the 10 grand thing?
Yeah, the
There's
Tulsa is
10 grand
aggressive.
to buy your Airbnb trailers.
Yep.
Put it
But
in Tulsa.
You have to go do it for a year. So you don't get the 10 grand from Tulsa until at the end of your year.
Oh, well then hang out in Tulsa for a year.
Yeah.
Get your salary remote, right?
Ben and I were
use
trying to
your
figure this out. Like, what's the rent on the apartment that they partially subsidize? You have to rent like these apartments.
It's
Like,
like
Really
that.
Quick pause. Does anyone want to like give a synopsis of that thing in case anyone
Yeah.
isn't aware of the Tulsa?
So essentially, and I don't have all the details, but it's kind of like I think a state in the northeast did this recently too. But
so that
yeah, if you are a remote developer or you work in technology, If you move to Tulsa, they will furnish an apartment, or they will provide a furnished apartment that you can rent, and they will give you $10,000 after, I guess, a year. After a year of being there. Now, downtown Tulsa it's kind of funny. Downtown Tulsa looks a little bit like a metropolis when you're down there, and then you get a block away from it.
Yeah,
And then you're back in
Tulsa.
as soon as you get past like Michigan, I forget like the streets are named after states or whatever. Yeah, you don't have to get far outside of it. Tulsa always surprises me. Like when I'm driving into it, I'm like, oh, hey, there's a city out here.
Yep.
And then I get into it, and I'm like, you know, but it's a cool program, and I potentially could do a lot of good for them, right? Like, be very successful to bring essentially like rural sourcing people to come in and live there, and then like that builds like a critical mass of community, and not that they don't have already like a deaf community there for sure, like in remote workers. It's pretty strong. Like, you know, Luke Crouch, who comes down to do a lot of meetup groups, comes from Tulsa. He works for Mozilla. Super cool guy, and he's always telling us good things about what's going on back there. They have the coolest name for a web conference ever, which is 200OK. That's awesome.
That's a good one.
And so like Ben and I were looking at that, and I was like, what are the requirements for this? Because like it seemed like it might be pretty rad to work remotely for Lofty Labs. Have an apartment in Tulsa that actually just gets used as a place to park your car, becomes a parking spot, so that we can get cheap airfare out of Tulsa International.
Can you use the apartment as an Airbnb?
That was totally
you have to do that.
Airbnb it out, right?
Yeah.
And make the rent, but have a place where I can like store my luggage and like park a car, and then take an Uber to the airport and fly for 75% less than X and A.
Yeah. See, what's funny is you mentioned you're always surprised with Tulsa. I am too, but I'm always like pleasantly surprised.
That came out way more negative.
No. But I don't mean you were surprised in a negative way. But like every time I drive there, I'm just like, oh, I got here faster than I thought. And then things are like, oh, this is nicer than I thought. Every time, and I've been there like at least once a year for the last 5-6 years. But every trip there. not always. But I generally enjoy my trip. Now, most of the time I'm going to like Canes for a concert or different things, but I do generally enjoy my time in Tulsa, brief though it may be.
Yeah, I never go for more than like not even a long weekend, usually just like a Saturday and turn it on Sunday or something. Or go see a show. Yeah. It's always a good time. I had the same reaction on a much higher scale with Kansas City. At least the like, wow, I'm here already.
Yeah.
It's so close.
Oh, for sure.
I growing up in Central Arkansas and then being up here, like you never think about anything about Kansas City. No. Central Arkansas is all about Dallas.
I worked out of Kansas City for a while remotely, and it was nice because when they would call business meetings and stuff, it was just a short trip.
I really like Kansas City a lot.
As a business, we have our eyes on it as just a market to do business in for the same reason. Like, I don't have to get on an airplane to go to a sales meeting in Kansas City.
That's true.
But like, it's right there, and it's like it's a legit city. It's
Power and Light District and Westport. Yeah.
I took that Django training that we got from Jacob Kaplan Moss. Was in Westport at the Q Hotel, is what it's called.
Very cool.
And we didn't know, we booked it, but it was during the week of St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
And so that's like somewhat Irish neighborhood. And that place was a party. So
cool.
So we got drunk on the top of Kelly's Westport Inn with the founder of Django.
That's excellent.
And had no respect for how fun of how cool of a time that was at the time. He was just some dude that was teaching his class I had to go to. But that was good stuff. Well, cool. I think I'm sure that we've rounded out an hour, if not more, on this one. So that was fun, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, come back sometime.
I hope to.
You're not far down the road, so
no. Down the trail, actually.
Yeah. And we do have a guest lined up for next week. We're gonna have Blake Johnson from Revenue that's gonna come hang out with us next week. And after that, like the schedule's open, so. Get in touch and let us know if you want to come hang out and talk on the show and like drink whatever beer is so interesting on the watch.
We'll try and get everybody's requests met with the beer. Sorry, Brenna.
All right, thanks everybody. We'll talk to you next time.
See you. It got hot.
Yeah, this room gets warm.
I was just saying, it's 70 degrees outside. The heat's running in the building. Four laptops, a soundboard, and then
5 sweaty adult men.
Why is it 70 outside? Fucking December. It's
I know.
almost a day away from December.
Oh man.
Global warming.
It's not real.
That was fun, thanks.
Yeah, that was fun.
Thanks for coming by and lending a hand.
I didn't have a lot to contribute on this.
It was good.
You're
I walked out and was like, I wanted